just dropped in. Who is that? Julia Cook. Got you down. So, any questions about the paper? It's getting close to due date and yeah, good. Well, I was kind of thinking that this stuff we've talked about and the other PowerPoints and stuff, we should give you a pretty good idea of how to put this together. So, good. And as David and I discussed last time, you can always send me a message on Canvas. I get it on my phone, so we're good. So today I wanted to kind of pick up where we left off, 18th century Europe. And the title of the chapter is Rococo and Neoclassicism. And as I was putting a lot of this stuff together, both last week and today, it occurred to me that in a lot of ways, it's kind of hard to tease these things out, to separate them out between Rococo, Neoclassicism, realism, and so on. Now, there are some artworks that clearly fall within one or the other categories, but there's actually a lot of cross-pollination here, if you understand what I mean by that. It's hard to find anything that's just truly neoclassical or truly realism, although realism kind of probably a little easier to identify. And the Rococo also has a little bit of classicism about it and so on. So I just wanted to start off with that because these are trends. These are what we'll later call movements. And bottom line is this. We're getting real close to looking at art that directly impacts how we see art here in the 21st century. But to get back to the 18th century, 1700s, I thought I'd begin with this. And this is an English painter, artist, social critic. His name's William Hogarth, and this is one of his paintings. Now, one of the things that we talked about earlier, the last couple of weeks, was the theatrical. We talked about that with Baroque art and how all mannerisms, body language, the whole composition, the way things are put together, it's more like stagecraft. And that was theatrical. And so there, at least the way the Greeks saw it, there were two different kinds of theater. Anybody know what they might be? Comedy and drama, or comedy and tragedy. You ever see the Janus faces when they give you a meme, if you will, a symbol for theater? They got two masks and one of them smiling and the other one's frowning. That comes all the way back from the Greek. And so we still have some theater, but what we have here in the 18th century is that we got some people going more for the comedic side, the comedy. We haven't seen much of that yet. We've seen a little bit of farce, we've seen a little bit of political stuff, but bottom line, we haven't seen truly funny stuff. And so this painting here, I'm going to see if I can get this YouTube video to play, because what we're getting into now is that there will be many of these artworks that have videos from Khan Academy. So let's see, can we get it? And where do we get? Well, it's not showing it directly, but maybe HOGARKAKHAN Academy. And this is the video I wanted to show you. So why don't we just go ahead and play this? So first of all, let me make sure I got the right screen sharing. Looks like I do. Can you guys at home see this? Calling all Zoom. They're not talking.
I can see it.
Okay, thanks, Mackenzie. So we're going to play this. This is a video on this one painting, and it's kind of cool.
In the National Gallery in London, we're looking at some 6 paintings by William Hogarth, who's best known for making prints, not paintings.
18th century is an interesting moment, especially in England and France, where we have the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, and as a result, a widening middle class that wants to buy art.
We have the landed aristocracy, which is in some ways beginning to lose power to a new merchant class that is because it's become wealthy.
Before, you had art that was serving the aristocracy, princes, monarchs, the church. We now begin to have art that is made for this growing middle class audience, and we have prints that are being sold to a wide public, and art becoming a commodity, something that large numbers of people buy.
And prints are a lot less expensive than paintings, and Hogarth's intent here was to use these paintings as a model produce, and then he would sell his prints for about $1 shilling a piece. Now that was more than a working class person could afford. It was well within the means of this new middle class.
So Hogarth is becoming an artist entrepreneur, something that might be very familiar to us in the 21st century, when art is still so closely allied to commerce.
I just said that just a minute ago about how a lot of what we're starting to see is going to look a lot more like present day art making and so on. Just saying this is where we're getting a big change, and in no small way, it is the rise of the middle class, period. And that, for me anyway, trying to explain what all of this stuff's about, we saw the pilgrimage to Cythera by Watteau. And it was, as I explained it, like a cruise ship excursion where they all went on holiday. And it was kind of like the old show, The Love Boat, where everybody was having affairs and little cupids flying around and so on. Here, I wanted to put into that is that seems like something like a middle class endeavor in today's era, in the 21st century. Most of you guys, if you really wanted to, could go on a cruise. You know, it's not that exclusive. But back in 1710, it was only the wealthy. So we're making that distinction. And I was glad to see they put that in to this video.
To galleries, to money making.
And it's so targeted to that new middle class because it is a very deeply moral set of images, but it's also a set of images that is full of fun, makes fun of the aristocracy. So the entire set is known as marriage a la mode, and is probably is concerned in the 18th century that marriages were sometimes arranged for economic benefit rather than for love.
Marriage a la mode means modern marriage or the marriage of today. The entire series, these 6 games, tell the story of an aristocratic family named wonderfully the Squanderfields, suggesting that they squandered their aristocratic fortune. And Lord Squanderfield has to have his son marry the daughter of a wealthy merchant so he can maintain his estate and all his worldly possessions. And the wealthy merchant's daughter gets in return the aristocratic title.
So what we have is an exchange. It is a kind of economic deal that's taking place. It's being brokered here. So let's look at the painting. On the right, you see Lord Squanderfield. He's pointing to his family tree, which is sort of medieval, suggesting what he's bringing to the table is this great lineage. Over on the left, you see his son in blue, and he's taking some snuff out of the box, and he looks really like a dilettante.
Well, he's actually looking in the mirror too, sort of gazing at his own reflection.
So we have no sympathy for him whatsoever.
And the woman behind him who he's going to marry, he has his back to. He's not paying any attention to her. This is an arranged marriage. The woman is being talked into it. Someone we're going to see later in the story.
His name is Silverton, and he's a counselor. So clearly, Hogarth is making fun of him and talking about him as a kind of smooth talker.
What's interesting is the way that Lord Squanderfield, with his gout-ridden foot, he's situated in between the family tree and this dowry that is being paid. And he's saying, look, I'm bringing a lot to the table here. I've got this long aristocratic lineage. This money that's piled up, this isn't even enough for me.
Well, that's because if you look out the window, he's building a new mansion. He needs to finance that. We see a lawyer at the table, and we also see the merchant himself, that is that young woman's father, and they're attending to the business transaction.
But the architect stares at the window, at the building that he's dreaming of constructing.
So everybody is in this for their own self-interest, with the exception of the young couple. The young man, self-involved, the young woman looks inconsolable.
But these 2 individuals will add to the disaster that is their end here.
So let's move to the second canvas. This is tête-à-tête, which means head-to-head, face-to-face.
This is the
The
one in the
husband has
book.
come home from a night of gambling and drinking and womanizing.
So how can we tell?
Well, the dog's sniffing at what looks like a woman's bonnet in his pocket. And he looks like he hasn't slept at all, but his wife looks like she's had some fun of her own while her husband was away. Her bodice is undone. She looks flirtatious, as though perhaps her lover has just left when her husband's come home. She seems to be signaling with a mirror held above her head to her lover, perhaps. The chair is overturned, an instrument is on the floor, a music book is open. There's an implication of lovemaking has taken place here, and it's just ended when the husband has come home.
And music was a traditional symbol of pleasure.
And sensuality and lovemaking. And in the room just past where they are, we see images of saints. So we have Hogarth commenting on the immorality of this couple.
To make sure that we don't miss these signals, Hogarth has placed a third figure in the foreground. He's a kind of accountant, and you can see that he's had it. He holds receipts, he holds bills, and he's thrown his hands up. He can't get this young couple to take their finances seriously.
And if you look at the mantelpiece, we've got all sorts of knickknacks lined up there that look like they've been recently purchased and look inexpensive and gaudy compared to this aristocratic environment, these oil paintings and gilded frames.
Well, that's the contrast that's important, I think, for Hogarth. It's making this sharp distinction between tawdry things that they've brought in, this young couple, and classicism that is a part of this aristocratic life.
The aristocracy has this reputation that they've inherited, these values that have accrued to them over centuries, but they're values that don't reflect the reality of their lives.
You can also see an addition, perhaps a painting that the man has brought in. It's partially obscured by a curtain, and all that's visible is a nude foot
On a bed,
on a bed.
clearly.
And so this would have been a very clear signal in the 18th century to a new painting. So in all of these paintings, actually, the artwork really tells a meta story. They comment on the scene that's being enacted, and we can see that right over the mantle. We have a classical sculpture, but its nose is broken. It as if it had been knocked over at some party. And painting of Cupid among the ruins, that is, love itself is here ruined, love itself has become a disaster. Let's look at the third painting. This canvas is called the inspection. It takes place in a doctor's office.
The apothecary, the doctor on the left, seems to be cleaning his glasses, which makes one worried about the kind of inspection he's going to perform. And the woman behind him is obviously his assistant. They're both clearly suffering from syphilis.
This is an important point. Lord Squanderfield, the younger Lord Squanderfield, actually has a sign of syphilis, which is that large black form on his neck. We see that throughout his canvases. As we know, he is likely visiting prostitutes. He is living a life of debauchery right from the beginning, and clearly infecting his young wife.
And here clearly is infected young woman brought with him to the doctor's office who seems to be applying some ointment to a sore on her mouth. I mean, it's ghastly.
As Clover is doing everything he can to remove anything that we possibly have from this young man.
He seems to be saying to the apothecary, your medicine isn't working. Give me my money back.
Well, the woman seems to be quite angry by that. The apothecary himself seems to be not particularly concerned. But the caricature that Hogarth brings to the rendering of these figures, the apothecary himself, that's just a disreputable face.
But again, the surroundings tell us something about the figures. In the medical cabinet, we see a model of a human figure next to a skeletal model. And even on the left side, we see a skull, which is also a symbol of death. But no one is thinking seriously the fact that they're going to die from it.
The young Lord Squanderfield here seems to be in a very good mood. Let's move on to the fourth canvas.
So that means here that the woman is at her dressing table. She's having her hair done. She's getting all her stuff. She's having her makeup done. And she's surrounded by her friends. Notice that she's not with her child. We do have an indication that she's had a child because we have a string of coral beads that would have been used for teething for children, but her child is nowhere in sight. She's not a good mother. She's hanging out with her friends instead.
She's in her bedroom, and her bedroom is this very public place, which is not so uncommon for the aristocracy. But we see on the left, for a second time now, the Councillor Silvertongue, and he looks right at home. Now, this to the 18th century would have suggested that he was actually illicitly the young woman's lover now. Remember, he was the one who was trying to talk her into the marriage, console her, and he has taken full advantage.
And there's music making and drinking, and obviously figures who are also suffering from syphilis. The figure on the far right seems to be holding tickets and pointing to an image of a masked ball.
The paintings on the wall that we're seeing are also important and make a comment on the scene that we see paintings that are about the trespassing of norms of behavior. And of course, that's exactly what this painting is.
Two of the paintings on the wall are about Zeus disguising in order to have a love affair. And that's exactly what we're going to see actually in the next scene.
So here it's night. This is the fifth painting. And here we're no longer in an aristocratic house. We're in a place of disrepute. This is the kind of room when you didn't want anybody to know what you're doing. And what we see is the young woman on her knees as her lover, that would be Silvertongue, leans out the window, screaming because he has just impaled her husband with his sword. She is beseeching him, asking for forgiveness because Silvertongue and another woman were caught in the act.
And it's clearly been at a masked ball. We see their discarded clothing. We see a mask.
So in the last scene, Hogarth sums up by showing the death of the young woman. So now the husband and the wife are dead. The wife has died because she's poisoned herself when she's read in the newspaper that's at her feet that her lover, Silvertongue, has inherited
The murder of her husband. That's right. And we see the nurse bringing her child to say goodbye to its mother. I mean, it's a terrible scene. We also see a syphilis spot on the child's cheek. So, the child is sick. This couple is irredeemable. And the entire practice of marriage that's based on this kind of economic exchange instead of love is really indicted.
Well, look, her very father is taking the gold ring from her finger, even when she is dying.
And the dog on the right is another symbol of really, this is it steals meat from the table.
And not just me, but pigs and children. And we see we're back in her home. This is not the aristocratic family of the Squanderfields. And you can see the Thames River just outside. You can see the city crowding in. And it's a reminder of the so radically in the 18th century.
So the great Victorian novelist Thackeray wrote about the set of 6 paintings and summed up the moral. He wrote, "Don't listen to evil, silver-tongued counselors. Don't marry a man for his rank or a woman for her money. Don't frequent foolish auctions and masquerade balls unknown to your husband. Don't have wicked companions abroad and neglect your wife. Otherwise, you will be run through the body and ruin will ensue and disgrace in Tyburn." And Tyburn is the place where criminals would be hanged.
Use power.
And let me get my screen back. There it is. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. It's theater and it's kind of comedy, but it's kind of dark comedy. It's satire and it's talking about the wealthy. There's a lot of those details about this series of paintings that you probably not understand unless you really knew the history, and especially the syphilis marks. STD pretty much wiped out in this day and age because of antibiotics, but back in this day, it was the plague. It had taken a lot of people and so on. So anyway, yeah, this is Hogarth. And I got a couple of other Hogarths. And as they said, he was primarily a printmaker. He made paintings and then did etchings from the paintings. And here is satire on false perspective. And it has a quote here on the bottom. "Whoever makes a design without the knowledge of perspective will be liable to such absurdities as are shown in this print." Engraved by William Hogarth. So, what is he talking about? Just take, for instance, all of that stuff that they developed in Renaissance Europe about perspective and the creation of, the illusion of three-dimensional space is all kind of turned on its ear here. Here we see the shingle from this building, and this is typically how they did advertising back in the day. I'm not exactly sure what the crescent moon means, but it's likely a hotel or an inn of some sort. But you see it's connected here on the building and it ends up in the trees on the hill behind. Likewise, they have all of this stuff. Take a look at this, how the fishermen are. And so the perspective and scale in this is like all backwards and upside down. And so to some extent, what this is, and for instance, like this guy up here, he's lighting his pipe from a candle that this woman is holding out the window. That can't happen. And look at the size of this crow as compared to the size of the tree. Look at the church. The whole thing is what you might call cattywampus. It doesn't follow perspective. You see, it kind of tilts this way and tilts that way and so on. So anyway, Hogarth was a satirist. And that was my big point when I talked about theater, comedy, tragedy, and satire is a form of comedy. I got another one here too, And this is kind of a moral lesson. Of course, all through his work, his life's work, he has this kind of message about morality. That's what we just saw with the marriage a la mode. How all of these people were just morally bankrupt. They were after money and they had no fidelity to their spouses, families, lovers, etc., etc. And they were killing people and they were stealing from each other and spreading syphilis, etc., etc. That's a moral statement. And this, the first stage of cruelty, and what he's saying here, he might as well have been in the 20th or 21st century, and that is that cruel people oftentimes begin as cruel children. And you sometimes, I don't know if you guys watch this stuff, and if you don't, I don't blame you one bit, but a lot of times these serial killers and people that do horrendous things to people, they find out that they enjoyed cruelty as children. They were the kind of people that would torture animals, take a magnifying glass and try to burn insects alive. And, you know, just this kind of sickness. Anyway, that's what this is. It's the first stage of cruelty. All of these are youngsters, and it's just awful. Here's a, I don't even know what this is, and hopefully I'm not going to inspire nightmares over this, but these are like real things about cruelty. There was this old cruel practice of tying cats' tails one to the other and throwing the rope over a tree branch, or in this case, a light lamp post. And the cats will claw each other to death, thinking the other is responsible. They'll do that. It's just animal instinct. We got, this is awful, torturing this dog by holding it up and shoving an arrow in his backside. Cockfights, that's another cruel practice. That's actually still, people do that today, unfortunately. But yeah, lesson, when youngsters are cruel to animals, you can expect that they'll grow up to be cruel people and be mean to other people. And so anyway, you can read a little bit of this. Behold, youth of a gentler heart, to spare the creature's pain. Oh, take me the cries, take all my heart. Anyway, bottom line, while pity charms the right, anyway. Bottom line, that's what this is. It's a morality play. And this was Hogarth. And so this is English 1700s, 18th century art. And so they kind of suggested a little bit of this in the Hogarth painting about marriage, is that for a lot of the wealthy, they did commission portraits of themselves and of their children and families and so on. So this is Gainsborough, and he was a great English portrait artist. Sir Joshua Reynolds, another great English portrait artist. And what we start to get here too, and this will continue, Benjamin West, The Death of General Wolfe. And this is in America. And it's in the National Gallery of Canada. And what you have here is that General Wolfe died on the battlefield. And all of the combatants, even including indigenous people here, all there during General Wolfe's final moments. And so this is kind of a glorification of all that we know happened in the 18th century. England was colonizing much of the known world and some of the places that were actually unknown at the time. And so this is kind of a making heroes out of our colonizers. And this, John Singleton Copley, is an American. This is the first American artist we've seen here. Well, I showed you Horatio Goodnow and George Washington last time, but this predates that. And Paul Revere, the famous American patriot, one of the founding fathers, storied midnight ride, the British are coming, the British are coming, alerting the citizens of New England, the greater Boston area, that the British have landed and they're coming to fight. Anyway, Paul Revere was actually a metalsmith. And he was a very skilled metalsmith. And that's what he has in his hand there, is a teapot. Presumably one that he made. And in fact, he did a lot of work, teapots, saucers, different kinds of amenities, you might say, for the wealthy. He was a skilled metalsmith. And you can see some of the tools of his trade right there. And so, yeah, this is him. And this is American. And portraiture is huge. Canaletto, Venice, 1735, 1740. And again, it's hard to kind of classify this. Is it Rococo? Is it realism? Is it romanticism? Who knows? But at any rate, it is something like that Dutch painting that we saw of the 17th century and the 18th century, where they actually just painted scenes of life. Not glorification, not a heroic battle, not portraits, but this is what life is like here. Another Rococo, considered to be Rococo painter, Bettoni, and again, wealthy portrait painting, a little bit of his wealth, his trappings here. Got a dog. This is kind of an interesting thing that happens in English portraiture too, because they really like their dogs, and they're a symbol of fidelity and loyalty and stuff. And they raised dogs. They were the wealthy, that's what they did. They raised hunting dogs and stuff. And you see these traditions that actually still carry on to this day, where they in England will have a fox hunt, for example, and they have all of these beagles and these hunters on horseback, and they let a fox go into the woods and they try to track them down. Weird, I know, but this is kind of an interesting thing too. This is in England as well, the Etruscan room, and this is what you might call neoclassical, square into the definition of neoclassicism, because all of these motifs and all of these images come right out of, excuse me, Etruscan art. Who knows what Etruscan is? You guys have this ADAH 100? It's pre-Roman Italian. The Etruscans were the civilization on the Italian peninsula before the Roman Republic actually came into prominence. And so they were contemporaries of the Greek Empire, which was across the Adriatic. And so anyway, yeah, this is right out of neoclassicism. It is English neoclassicism. And again, neoclassicism, still, we've seen that go on and on and on. We saw that in the Renaissance. I keep going back to Cayley's Botticelli, The Birth of Venus. That's neoclassicism, and here we are 300 years later, and we're still doing these kinds of paintings, glorifying and celebrating the classical world of Greece and Rome. And so, with that being said, this is French neoclassicism. And a star by it, because this is another one I wanted to talk about at length. And in this painting, it is actually pretty relevant to the times in which we live. It's relevant to the moment in which we live. How many of you guys been seeing the news about Ukraine? Yes, good. I see some head shaking. Well, what's happening there? Their president is telling all of his population, fight back. They're handing out guns. They're defending their homeland. And that's kind of the simple explanation, but the Russians have come in and invaded their country. And that's really kind of along the lines of what's happening here. And it is the ADAH Harachi. And bottom line is that these three brothers, the Harachi, some people pronounce that Haraki, but the Harachi, they're pledging to defend their homeland. And they have this elder here, and you can always tell the elders because they have beards and they're kind of like, you know. But these three have promised to fight for their homeland. And here are their families, children, babies, 3 wives. They're sad, they're grieving, but the men are brave. They're fighting for their homeland. And so this was in 1784, and this was on the eve of the French Revolution. And so there was a lot of that patriotism, defending the homeland, defending the liberty, fighting for your family, defending your women and children. And so I have here yet another video. Like I say, almost all of these have some kind of video with them. But this is kind of big time. And it's big time because in some scholars call ADAH Horatia, or the ADAH Harachi, the beginning of modern art. And I think that if we see YouTube here, Let's see, VID, that is David. And this is YouTube. Smart history, yeah, we're going for it. Got to make sure I got the right share. Looks like it. We're in business.
We're standing in one of the largest galleries.
Okay, I want to tell you something here. This is a spoiler alert. That this is the Louvre, one of the largest galleries in the world, the Louvre in Paris. And you see these paintings. We're going to actually, in this next chapter, see a lot of these same paintings, especially this one, Jericho, the Raft of Medusa, Delacroix, Liberty Meeting People, etc. But this is it.
In the Louvre in Paris. It's filled with enormous paintings. We're looking at Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatia. This is a painting that was made in 1784 and exhibited in 1785. And this painting stole the show. It was absolutely new. Nobody had ever seen anything like it.
The prevailing style in France was the Rococo. We could think about artists like Boucher or Fragonard, a style that appealed to the aristocracy.
And even in the kind of history painting that was made for the king, the style had become formulaic. It had become tired. But David's Oath of the Horatii establishes a new style that we call neoclassicism.
Critics like Diderot are calling for an art that depicts virtuous behavior, very different from the prevailing Rococo style. And this painting answers that call.
This is the tail end of the period in France that we call the Enlightenment, with philosophers like Rousseau, Diderot, and Voltaire, who posit the idea that the rational should supersede tradition and the spiritual.
The church was incredibly powerful. The monarchy in France was incredibly powerful. And the philosophers of the Enlightenment are asking questions about the validity of these very established institutions.
And remember, it will only be a few years before the French Revolution begins.
Right, this is exhibited in 1785, the revolution is 1789.
And the American Revolution has already taken place, based in large part on the ideas of French Enlightenment philosophers.
We have a story from early ancient Roman history.
The early Roman state is at war with the neighboring city of Alba.
But instead of the armies of each side going to war, they decided to send 3 brothers from each side to battle it out. Whoever survives is the side that's victorious.
The Romans choose the Horatii, and the city of Alba chooses the Horatii.
But things get very complicated because there are intermarriages between these 2 families. So no matter who wins,
Both sides will lose.
exactly.
What we see is the father of the Horatii holding swords aloft as the sons take an oath to battle to the death.
For Rome,
On the right, we see 3 women and 2 children. There's some disagreement as to who the woman in blue is in the back.
we see 2 young women in the foreground. One of them is a Horatii sister, and she's married to one of the Horatii brothers.
The other is a Horatii by birth, but will marry one of the Horatii,
Families will be torn apart by this battle.
no matter what happens.
By making the women appear so curvilinear, so passive, they don't even have their eyes open. David is suggesting an idea that was very prevalent in the philosophy of Rousseau, for example, that women could not be true citizens of the state. They were unable to think about civic responsibility. Women could only think about the personal and the familial.
And look at how David has depicted that contrast. If women are curvilinear, if their bodies are limp, the male figures are rigid, they are upright, they are tall, they are strong.
They are angular in the forms of their bodies. They raise their arms together. There's a sense of purpose that is completely absent from the women who appear to be just victims of circumstance here.
The young men are working in unison. Their arms salute in unison. There is clearly a reference to the idea of strength in a kind of brotherhood, in a kind of collective.
David represents all of this in a classical emphasizing style, looking back to ancient Greece and Rome. There is an interest in the anatomy of the body, of carefully depicting the musculature, the movement of the body, that is directly from ancient Greek and Roman art.
In fact, the writing, which rakes across the surface, reminds me of an ancient Greek or Roman relief art. And all of this is set within a simplified stone interior with rounded Roman arches, simplified Tuscan columns, and a pavement that creates a geometric stage for these figures.
And if we follow the orthogonal lines created by that pavement, we end at a vanishing point.
Right where the father's hand clasps the swords.
If we think about the lushness, the luxuriousness of Rococo painting, to me this painting is the exact opposite. It's one that speaks of the virtue of simplicity over the indulgence of the Rococo style, exactly what the Enlightenment philosophers were calling for artists to do.
And audiences recognized that stark contrast. In fact, the salon had to stay open longer than it had originally scheduled, just to accommodate the
Wanted you to see this. I have another picture of this on my phone, but I'm going to make the point now because I forgot it was on this. This is a salon. And this was, they talked about this as it was a salon show and it had to be held open for a much longer period of time just to accommodate the people that wanted to see this picture, the Oath of the Horatii. And so this is what they did back in late 18th century France. And what they had here was it would be a display of all of the art that the powers that be, the academics, thought was worthy of display. So this is what they did. It was an annual event. It'll play a large part in 19th century French painting too, but this is like a touchstone here. You got to know what this is. And the point I was going to make further down the line, in a few class periods from now on, we get more close to the present, is this. Does this remind you of anything? The way these paintings are displayed? How about if you buy t-shirts like at Five Below? You know, they put the image of the t-shirts and they stack them up and they're all along a wall. It seems more organized than this. But it kind of says something about that and today, in that today, in the 21st century, artists have their hands on many things. And we wear clothing like me. I got a t-shirt on. It's at Maryville University. Somebody in the back there likes Outcast, Boombox, or well, a speaker box. We talked about that. Bottom line is that an artist did these things. Somebody's got a mask on that's got a pretty scary teeth. See, artists are involved, and art kind of hits everything that we do in a way that didn't really happen 300 years ago. Period. 250 years ago. And so art was kind of relegated to this and to printmaking and book illustrations and so on. But the idea of art that you could buy, I want B17 up there in a size XL. Just say it. But this is the way art was at that time.
The numbers of people wanted to see it.
One of the most fascinating things about this painting is that during the revolution, the brothers and their willingness to die for their country resonates with the revolutionaries who must make sacrifices of themselves and their families for the ideals of the revolution.
And David does become a revolutionary himself, and so it's very tempting to read back into this painting. But we have to remember that the painting was completed several years before the revolution, although it was certainly informed by the same philosophical values that the revolution was founded on.
David not only becomes a revolutionary, he votes for the beheading of the king. We're talking about an artist who is very politically engaged.
And this painting becomes an icon for the revolution.
When I look at this painting, I sense that patriotic fervor that must have been so palpable in the early years of the revolution, when people were able to rise up against the abuse of a monarchy and to begin to imagine a republic for France.
And let me see if I got my share right. That looks good. Perfect. So they gave you some hints there of why they thought this was, at least by the determination of some scholars, in the opinion of some scholars, that this is the beginning of modern art. Because it's for the people, it's got a message that's directed at the people. But what you see there is both with Hogarth and David, artists are doing artwork to inspire virtuosity and morality and ideals and so on that relate to regular people, not the aristocracy. And so this is another David, the death of Marat. And how many of you, this used to be required reading back in my day, Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities? Well, it's about London and Paris at this time in the 1790s. And Marat was a revolutionary, and he was betrayed by a woman named Charlotte Corday, and he was stabbed. Bottom line, Marat had a skin condition that required him to soak in the tub like long periods of time. His skin, he had some kind of skin problem. And that's why he's in there, and that's why he has his pen, has his ink, has his paper. He's doing his reading and writing from the bathtub. And she came in and killed him. And so again, this was a revolutionary kind of thing. It's a talk here that David was a revolutionary. And soon after the revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte comes to power in France, and he becomes a favorite painter of Napoleon. And David becomes the head of the French Academy of Art. And so he's a big hero. And so anyway, I showed you some of these before. Neoclassical architecture, pervasive, it's all over, even in the Americas. And I showed you that. So I got a bunch of more stuff to show you and a bunch more to say. And let's go big. Let's go. Come on. that's the right share. Let's do the slideshow from beginning. Okay, good. So we're moving into the 19th century. And so, as I said before, these categorizations kind of are a little loose. Romanticism, realism, photography, but we'll see actually a lot of influence here of neoclassicism in the artwork we're about to see. So like I say, these are not fast and firm. They are kind of fluid, but they reflect the attitudes of the time. And so as I was saying about Napoleon, whoa, here he is. The Napoleonic Empire in 1812. And so this has kind of pulled him back into the Low Countries in France and parts of Italy. But at one time, French Empire was actually a lot bigger. It says, shows you right here, country dependent on France. And that is a lot of this. This is a bunch of the rest of this. And so anyway, Napoleon, he goes out and he conquers much of the known world. Goes all the way to Moscow, 1814, and the Russians beat him. They stopped it. And by 1815, Napoleon goes in exile. But bottom line, makes France a big power in Europe. And this is Europe in around 1850. And you can see a lot of these become independent countries. So there's a lot of changes going on. I can't just show you one map and it covers the whole time period. This chapter only covers 70 years and we could have a dozen maps. But at any rate, let me tell you about the artwork. This is 1804, early 19th century. And Napoleon is everything. We just talked about the Oath of the Horatii and the French Revolution. And this guy comes out on the other side as being the military genius that expands the French Empire. Of course, he expands the empire, but at the same time, some other things are happening. One is that France sells the Louisiana territories to Thomas Jefferson. When is the Louisiana purchased? 1804. Just say it. Not a coincidence. Napoleon's going to take over a lot of places, and this place here in Jaffa, that's in modern day, I believe it's in Syria. It's in the Middle East. It's in the Holy Land. And here you got Napoleon on the march. He moves to 1799, goes down to Egypt, conquers Egypt, moves into the Holy Land, the Middle East, and here he is. Napoleon visiting the plague-stricken in Jaffa. And so this at the time was called a pest house. And what that meant was that these people in here were struck by pestilence. And that is that they had diseases, and in some cases it might be leprosy or any other kind of contagious diseases. And this was a way of quarantining all of the people. I guess you can kind of think about that in today's terms too, with vaccinations and masks and social distancing. But we know a lot more. The only thing they could do 120 years ago, 220 years ago, was kind of put them in a place, a pest house, or with lepers, they often did leper colonies, if you will. But at any rate, here's Napoleon, and some of his own people are in here because they become sick as they come through here with his armies, and some of his own people are in the pest house, the plague-stricken in Joppa. Whoa. Napoleon comes in to see him, and this guy here has open sores. He's got an open sore right there on his chest, under his arm. What does Napoleon do? He sticks his hand in it. What? That's kind of like making Napoleon a Christ-like figure. Christ did that sort of thing. Christ went in and healed the sick by placing his hands on them. But this is like really kind of a very interesting painting in that it puts Napoleon as almost as a godlike figure, if you will. Now I want to add a couple of other things, and that is you can see some of the Islamic architecture here up on the background, but the archways, this is a typical Islamic archway. This is the same kind of archway you'll find in the mosque, the great mosque in Cordoba, Spain. And so anyway, just saying, one of the things that happens in France at this time, hope you guys don't mind pull my mask off. Oh, good. You can hear me now. It's still like I'm not this all the time. So you guys got the word, right? They sent you notification that they're optional. Yeah. Well, I like to keep mine handy, and I see you guys do that too. And I think we still, personally, think we still need to be safe, but you guys are social distancing. You're not doing anything stupid. And I think that's how I want to run too. So anyway, when I'm talking about this, one of the things that happens in French art is that as Napoleon is kind of traipsing all over the old world, if you will, Northern Africa, Asia Minor, Russia, places, the artists are following Napoleon. And the French public, when I showed you the salon where they put the paintings up and judged them, the salon was starting to really, they were finding that paintings of these exotic places were really very popular. We saw the Oath of the Horatii being very popular. But by the time Napoleon starts conquering the world, if you will, the French can't get enough. And in fact, so much that when Napoleon is in Egypt in 1799, he brings a bunch of barges and archaeologists and artists and scholars with him, and they actually haul off anything that wasn't nailed down. They pull up a lot of the monuments like the obelisk. They took all of the statues that they could. They took something else away at that time that became historically significant. It was called the Rosetta Stone. How many of you know about Rosetta Stone? Yeah, Dave. What does it do? What does it did? What is it?
From what I know, it's like supposed to be this lady.
Yes, precisely. Thank you. What it did was this, it was a stone, it was kind of a huge stone, and it was a marker. And it was written in 3 languages, and it had basically, it was the kind of thing that you put at the city limits and say, well, if you're coming into the city, you have to behave yourself, no public drunkenness, curfew at midnight, whatever the local laws were, the rules of behavior. You know, if you're coming in here, you gotta behave yourself, basically. But it was written in 3 languages because it came from a time roughly about the same time as Cleopatra, which was late in the Egyptian history, and they were ruled by Ptolemaic pharaohs, which were highly connected with the Greeks. So the top line was in Old Greek, the middle line was in the current Egyptian language, and the bottom line was in the old Egyptian language, which was the hieroglyphics. And when they figured out that all 3 of those lines or all 3 of those sections said exactly the same thing, they were able to decode all of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So there was some good that came out of all of the looting that happened, but basically this is what Napoleon did. His artists followed him, and the French were enamored with the exotic. And that becomes a hallmark of Romanticism. Exotic, things we've never seen before, the rest of the world far away. And so, as I said, these things all kind of happen simultaneously. This is La Magdalene in Paris. And look at what this is. This is Greek architecture. It's in the style of the Parthenon, classic Greek architecture. And so, as I was saying last week, that the architectures in a lot of ways is neoclassic because they wanted to give the message to show their affinity for the ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, the pre-monarch, the pre-Christian. So they're talking about a time when the Pope didn't rule everything, and the time before kings and queens ruled everything. We were talking about a republic. The people rule themselves. And that's what a republic is. And so this is David, again, Napoleon crossing the St. Bernard Pass, and this is up in the Alps, and this is more the adventures of our guy Napoleon conquering the world, and this would, this is what they did. And here is another David. Like I say, he was kind of the preeminent painter in early 19th century France. The coronation of Napoleon, sometimes it said that the coronation of Napoleon and Josephine, which is his wife, and that would be her here. And here is placing the crown, or he's accepting the crown. And this should be, let's get a good look at it. Yep, that's Napoleon accepting the crown. And you still see, this is kind of an important thing, that there are a lot of clerics here, a lot of bishops and cardinals and stuff, and the church hasn't lost its influence entirely, but people were not governed by the church, and that is a huge difference. And so you can see military people here, some wealthy people, but you don't see any kings and queens. You see Napoleon, the emperor. And Antonio Canova, Cupid and Psyche. Again, we're still neoclassical sculpture, reasonably large, 5 feet high. Classical Greek and Roman. And so here comes David's main rival, a guy named Ang, John Auguste Dominique Ang. And this is Napoleon on his imperial throne. And hey, he's got his laurels. He's been coronated. Ang and David, they're kind of similar backgrounds and similar philosophies when it comes to picture making. And I'm gonna kind of hope, but there we go. I got up to another arm, so there's a lot of stuff in between. Grand Odalisque. This is something that David probably would have never done. But this is kind of neoclassicism meets romanticism. And Odalisque, you know what that is? Odalisque. It's time. Oh, I'm going to leave you hanging. I will answer that question on Wednesday in Odalisque. If you want to look it up, fine, but finish up those papers and I'll see you on Wednesday. And by the way, am I mistaken or am I correct in believing next week is spring break? Yeah, the 7th, which is a week from today, it's birthday of spring break. I found that out today. Oh, I knew it because I made the schedule, but I go, man, already. So we'll meet on Wednesday. I'll tell you about the Odalisque. I'll read your papers. And I got a quiz that I want you to finish up before we go on break. I'll have it ready. And so with that being said, hope the weather stays nice. Hope you have a lot of fun. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're on Zoom, you guys, and I'll see you Wednesday.
Bye. See you Wednesday.
Bye, Ashlyn.
Thank you.
You bet, Mackenzie.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I can answer my question myself. Thank you, though.
Okay,
Uh,
bye.